In my last speech, I asked you how you would use your history to form a better future. I mentioned Gregory Watson and how he discovered and campaigned for the addition to the Constitution we know as the 27th Amendment. Well, before the 27th Amendment, our senators and representatives faced pay raises in a slightly different way. Whereas the 27th Amendment makes it so that members of Congress cannot receive a pay raise until after the next election, Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1 of the American Constitution is very vague on the subject of pay raises. Article 1, Section 6 structures how members of Congress will be paid and what immunities they are privileged with. Our senators and representatives are paid by the national government, not the state. The government was structured this way to equalize the burden faced by states. For example, a state like Alaska would have to pay more for their congressmen's travel than a state like Maryland because of the location of Washington, D.C. Now, while the way members of Congress are paid is very important, there's another part of this article that has an even more special purpose. Our senators and representatives are privileged with two different types of immunity. The first is not as common as it was back when the Constitution was created. This is the privilege from civil arrest. The second immunity involves punishments made for remarks as part of the legislative process. This section is often referred to as the Speech and Debate Clause. The Speech and Debate Clause originates from one of the famous English doctrines you heard of earlier, the English Bill of Rights of 1689. This clause was first worded in the English Bill, but its history traces all the way back to the beginning of Parliament. In England, the king was very fond of fining members of Parliament for libel if he disagreed with their speeches. The Speech and Debate Clause in Article 1, Section 6 is purposely targeting this problem. The nature of the clause prevents members of Congress from being sued for official actions that are essential to the liberation of Congress beyond just formal debate. This was the first form of freedom of speech in the Constitution, and it was all based off a history the founders wanted to rectify. Cornell law states that this clause represents the culmination of a long struggle for parliamentary supremacy. Behind these simple phrases lies a long history of conflict between the Commons and Tudor and Stuart monarchs, during which successive monarchs utilized the criminal and civil law to suppress and intimidate critical legislators. Since the Glorious Revolution in Britain and throughout United States history, this clause has been recognized as an important protection on the integrity and independence of the legislature. A large duty of our citizenship is to ensure that our history, both good and bad, is taught in future generations. Recent events show that some legislators and teachers wish to censor our history to make it less indicative of past failures. In Georgia last year, the Senate rejected U.S. history curriculum and threatened to cut all funding for the course if it was not changed to be less representative of past mistakes. Leaders and legislators in states like Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Colorado are also talking about changing what we are taught to promote, quote, American exceptionalism and not what is bad about America. As the youngest generation, we need to know what has failed in the past so that we can work towards this concept, but in a guided manner. Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1 is another great example of why we need to study our history before we take action or legislate. Our founders knew their past when it came to this article, and that is why they included the Speech and Debate Clause to make their game, or Constitution, as solid as possible. As citizens, we need to continue studying historical precedents before we try to progress. Because after all, how can we progress if we keep repeating the mistakes of the past? Thank you.